Hello and welcome back to the GB Fantasy Football channel. In today's video, we might be doing a slightly new series, potentially. We'll see how it goes. The series is called The Good, the Bad and the Better, where we cover the highest transfer players in and the highest transfer players out from the previous week's deadline to see how they might have actually potentially played. Was it a mistake? Was it a good transfer? We'll review them all as we go ahead. Now, thank you very much for the support on the previous episode. We did cover my transfer plans ahead of game week 10, so if you've missed that one, go check it out. And there's over 80% of you who view these videos who are yet to subscribe, so do it. It's completely free down below. It helps the channel out, and we are on the road to 1,300 subscribers. And as always, with every Sun Dream Team video, 100 thumbs up, 100 likes on the video is the target. And don't forget to hit the bell notification while you're down there to complete the perfect hat trick. And without further ado, let's crack on with the content. Before we continue and look at the players who were highest transferred in and transferred out ahead of game week 9, that is, unfortunately on Sun Dream Team, it's not quite like other fantasy formats where you can see a live transfer count. Of course, all transfers are hidden behind the data until the deadline passes. So the data is actually from game week 9. But I think a lot of the players in today's video are still going to be highly trended into our teams and out of our teams. Of course, a lot of highly owned assets potentially being moved on for monetary reasons or other reasons elsewhere. Now, leave a comment down below on how many players that you've still got to play this week. As of recording this, it will probably be coming out either Thursday morning or Wednesday night. So do leave a comment on how your week has gone. Did the Carabao Cup fixtures aid your team? Was you disappointed with a few players not playing in those starting lineups? I've got 11 doublers, supposedly, but we already know at least one of mine in Dean Henderson will be on the bench. So I'm down to 10. His transfer in hasn't been very good lately. And if it was down to me, he would be in this video as well currently. Now, looking at the fixtures before we get onto the players, I've gone up until game week 12 on this one, which is the double after the international break. Liverpool, some very good fixtures coming up. Crystal Palace at home tonight, of course. The ones in game week 9 are still the Carabao Cup fixtures that have got to play this week. Game week 10, they've got Aston Villa at home and Real Madrid at home. Of course, very tricky for Real Madrid at home. Followed by Manchester City away. Now, Man City, they've had some defensive issues across the previous seasons. The transfer in of Donnarumma seems to have aided that substantially. But without a holding midfielder, Rodri's slowly being reintegrated back into the team. There could be some goals in that one on both sides. And Nottingham Forest at home and PSV at home on the other side of the international break. I'll cover the European teams on this section for the fixtures. Manchester City, they've got Swansea away tonight. I wouldn't expect many of their starters to play at all in that one, if any. Bournemouth and Borussia Dortmund in the double for game week 10. Of course, Liverpool at home in game week 11. Very similar to the Liverpool aspect of things for that fixture. I wouldn't be put off captaining someone like an Erling Haaland in that one if Liverpool don't tighten up defensively. They've been very poor over the last 4 or 5 game weeks in the Premier League, and I see Manchester City causing them issues. And it's Newcastle away and Bayer Leverkusen at home in game week 12. For Arsenal, Brighton at home tonight in the Carabao Cup. Similar to Manchester City and Liverpool, it's going to be a recurring theme with all these European teams, bar 2, in my opinion, but we'll get to that in just a little bit. I wouldn't expect many of the starters to play. Maybe, in my opinion, I think either Saka or Gabriel will start, not both. If Gabriel does start, I'm crossing my fingers that he gets through to the 60th minute and comes away injury free, especially with Saliba's potential injury doubts as well. Going into game week 10, Burnley away at Turf Moor. As we saw with Liverpool when they went there, when it took a 94th or 95th minute penalty for Salah. When they shut up shop, it's very hard to break them down. And I think that's Slavia Prague for Arsenal in game week 10. Sunderland away in game week 11 is a fixture that we would have wanted to target. With Sunderland's form this season, that is a very tricky fixture. Going into game week 12 after the international break for Arsenal, a double home fixture, and that is Tottenham at home and I believe Bayern Munich at home. Tricky games. Newcastle, Tottenham at home tonight in the Carabao Cup. Of course, they are the holders, so I'd expect a very strong team in that one. A few changes. I don't see Anthony Gordon playing. I see Harvey Barnes deputising on that left wing position. Someone like an Osulu up front instead of a Volta Marder, and maybe Trippier coming out for someone like Emil Kraft. But on the whole, also Aaron Ramsdale, I fully expect to start one instead of Pope. Tottenham at home this week. West Ham away and Athletic Bilbao. That is in game week 10. Brentford away in game week 11. And then after the international break, it's Manchester City at home and Marseille away. Newcastle defensively have been pretty tight at the back. Voltemada and Gordon predominantly scoring the majority of the points up front prior to the game week just gone. They're looking good. Chelsea, Wolves away in the Carabao Cup. They've already mentioned Enzo Maresca, that is, in his press conferences. Caicedo, Enzo Fernandez, and João Pedro will more than likely be rested in this one. Who else gets dropped? Still yet to be seen. Liam Delap isn't ready to start the game, so as someone who brought in Mark Guéhi last week, I am very hopeful that he starts or at least gets some minutes in this one, especially with how poor Wolves have been. Tottenham away and Carabao away in game week 10. So 3 away fixtures on the bounce for Chelsea. Wolves at home in game week 11, a very favourable fixture to target, and Burnley away and Barcelona at home in game week 12. So maybe some rotation for that Burnley fixture depending on what players have been away on international duty for them. Going down the list, we've got Tottenham Hotspur, Newcastle away tonight in the Carabao Cup, Chelsea at home and Copenhagen in game week 10, followed by Manchester United at home in game week 11. So 3 home fixtures on the bounce for them after tonight's Carabao Cup game before the international break. And then they have got, where is it on the list? Let's have a little look. Just tricky fixtures all the way down. Arsenal away and then PSG away after the international break in game week 12. So not a very favourable double to come back to after that international break for Tottenham. And finally, Crystal Palace. Of course, Nottingham Forest, they don't have a Carabao Cup double this week. Got knocked out nice and early for them. So Crystal Palace, a team that many of us would have opted for. Some rotation expected tonight. As I mentioned, Dean Henderson, definitely not starting. Chris Richards, definitely not starting. And it does look like Mateta will also be rested in this one for Eddie Nketiah. So for them, Liverpool away tonight in the Carabao Cup might be a decent fixture considering some rotation that's suggested from the Liverpool side of things. Brentford at home and AZ Alkmaar in game week 10. Then we've got Brighton at home in game week 11 before the international break, and Wolves away with a very tricky Conference League away fixture to follow as well. So Crystal Palace assets still good going forward. They're the fixtures. Let's push on to the best transferred in, or the most transferred in, and the most transferred out from the previous game week. Unsurprisingly, considering the Cole Palmer injury update and just his general position in that Chelsea team, Enzo Fernandez was the highest percentage transferred in player inside the top 1K of players this week, brought in by 13.8% of the player base. Before I actually go on, with all the data in today's video and all the graphics, the screenshots and all, they've been brought to you by not only FPL.co.uk, a fantastic fantasy website, not just for Sun Dream Team content, but for all fantasy games. As always in all my videos, this is not a sponsored segment. The link to the website is down below in the description. Really helpful, really helps me out trying to select players, seeing the data behind it, and visually it aids that kind of stuff as well. So for Enzo Fernandez, as you can see across the season, it's been very up and down. Started the season well, just a 2-pointer at home to Palace on the opening day, followed by a 13-pointer and a 14-pointer against West Ham and Fulham respectively. 4 games back-to-back of not so great scores, but then 9-pointer against Ajax in the Champions League, and then a 6-pointer this week for those of you who did bring him in against Sunderland. We think he's on penalties. Of course, that 9-pointer against Ajax consisted of him giving a penalty away to Esteval. So if he was a little bit selfish in this one, we're looking at a very, very high double-digit score for him. I think why Palmer's out is a very solid option. He's going to tick over. He'll pick you up a couple of tackle points. He'll get in the bonus every now and again. And with those late darting runs into the box that he seems to have trademarked along the way, I do feel like he's going to pick up points. If you've already got some more Chelsea attacking assets, there's a few more that might have been brought in on this list. We'll get to in a little while. But players such as Pedro Neto, you've got Esteval, Caicedo, not as much attacking, but definitely ticking over. Do you really want to double up on that Chelsea attack, considering, yes, they've been on some decent form, but how will they react to that Sunderland loss at the weekend? I think Enzo Fernandez is always going to be a decent option, and I can definitely see why some players, mainly 14% nearly, have brought him into the teams from the last game week. I think as a long-term hold, it's a good option. The second highest player brought in for game week 9, percentage-wise in the top 1K that is, was Anthony Gordon. Now this actually surprised me just a little bit. Of course, this did come off the back of his 15-pointer against Benfica in the Champions League. I think it was a goal and an assist, if I'm not mistaken. But he's very hit and miss. I brought him in after the 15-pointer against Bradford in the Carabao Cup in game week 5. So I've had him for game week 6 onwards. Started in my team with a slow 4-pointer at home to Arsenal. Of course, he surprisingly took the penalties in the double in game week 6, that was. Picked up the 19-pointer. 2 points and 3 points respectively against Forest and Brighton. Are very disappointed. But then with the 15-pointer, it's lured more people into his potential. Now, it looks like the cup competitions are very much Anthony Gordon's forte. 15-pointer against Bradford, 9-pointer against Barnsley, 19-pointer against Union Saint-Gilloise. I know it's the Belgium team from the Champions League. Comment down below on how you pronounce it correctly. And then, of course, Benfica with the 15-pointer. So between the last 2 Champions League games that he's featured in, he's picked up 34 points. When you combine that with his last 4 Premier League games, where he's picked up, 6, 9, just a 13-pointer. So last 4 Premier League fixtures, 13 points. Last Champions League fixture alone, 15 points. So rotation is not playing into his hands. He's being brought off in the 70th minute. I think if you've got him, don't sell him. Because if they get a penalty and he's on the pitch, you're going to kick yourself for it. Would I be scrambling to get Anthony Gordon into my squad as things stand? I think I'll tell you more after they play Tottenham tonight. Maybe he scores again in another cup competition. But his Premier League form and his low minutes are worrying me going forward. And for that, I'd definitely put him in the could be better category for transfers in. A player that wouldn't have been on too many radars when we first started our drafts back in July on Sun Dream Team, mainly because of a certain Mohamed Salah and his form from last season, and that was Cody Gakpo. Now, one of the reasons for that is the fact that he's categorised as a forward on this game, as an attacker. I think personally, if he was a midfielder, which on other fantasy formats, both Salah and Gakpo are categorised as midfielders, and in my opinion, similar to someone like Jared Bowen, I do think a winger should be a midfielder, but that's an argument for another day. With him taking up an attacker position, I think he kind of got pushed to the back burner, especially not wanting to double up on that Liverpool attack. With Salah, you had Ekitike, you had Isak. Gakpo slipped under the radar, and for those of you who did pick up on him nice and early, or he was in your game week 1 team and you went without Mohamed Salah, I think you've done exceptionally well since the start of the season. Now, as you can see, up until game week 4, an 11-pointer, a 9-pointer, a 3-pointer, and a 6-pointer, very solid returns. So you wouldn't only have got those points, you probably would have saved, I think it was 3 million or so on Salah. Hit a very tricky section between Atletico Madrid, Everton, Southampton, and Crystal Palace, only scoring 4 points over 4 game weeks. But since game week 6 Champions League fixture, all the way up until Brentford at the weekend, he scored exceptionally well, picking up a 6-pointer against Galatasaray, a 10-pointer against Chelsea. I say only 9 points at home to Manchester United because that could have easily been 20 plus points. He hit the post 3 times. He got a goal in that one. 18-pointer against Frankfurt in the Champions League, where a few people actually suggested that he might have got rested in that one. They trialled a new formation. I think it was more of a 4-4-2. But it seems he is Arne Slot's man, out on that left-hand side. With the departure of Luis Diaz, there doesn't seem to be much competition out there. I think a few Liverpool fans are hoping to see Ekitike out on the left with Isak up front and Salah on the right. But that's not been seen so far this season too much. And he's picked up 4 points away to Brentford at the start of game week 9. And I think going forward, he is a very solid option. Would I be bringing him in? ahead of game week 10, 11. I think that solely depends, in my opinion, on Mohamed Salah and your views on him. I wouldn't be doubling up on the Liverpool attack. Of course, they have struggled over the last 4 Premier League fixtures, but it just goes to show, even in those fixtures, Cody Gakpo hasn't struggled. So if you want to save the money on someone like Mohamed Salah, who we'll get to in just a little bit, I think Cody Gakpo is currently, along with Dominic Szoboszlai, the best budget options. I say budget, lower premium options price-wise to cover Mo Salah and to pick points up in your FPL team. For me, is a good selection. And the final player who was highly transferred in ahead of game week 9 was Pedro Neto of Chelsea. Now, this is the second player on this list following Enzo Fernandez. Pedro Neto not quite transferred in as much as Enzo Fernandez was. Enzo Fernandez was touching 14% in the top 1K. Pedro Neto was transferred in by 10.7%, so still a pretty fair chunk of the player base. And that would, of course, come off the back of his 17 pointers, so he would have gone up 0.3 in value. Now, you can see the trend with the transferred players in, and it's something that we've spoken about before on Sun Dream Team, where we feel as though the player pool is limited off by their performances in the previous game week. You're not going to bring in a player, I'm speaking on general terms here, you're not going to generally bring in a player who has scored -3 points and is in line for a 0.3 drop in value, even if they had someone and favourable fixtures such as, I don't know, Ludogorets at home and Burnley at home in a double following. That's just hypothetical, of course, because you don't want to lose that 0.3 value. Now, as you can see with Pedro Neto, prior to his 17-pointer away to Nottingham Forest, his points were pretty poor. 2 points against Liverpool, 2 points against Benfica, 3 points against Benfica, two against Brighton, 2 against Lincoln, 1 against Manchester United. I think that was an early substitution due to the Sanchez red card. 2 against Bayern Munich, 4 against Brentford, and 3 against Fulham. Now that is a really long stretch of fixtures where he's not contributed at all. Of course, he picked up the 17-pointer against Forest. He doesn't play against Ajax, so that doesn't affect his price rise potential. And all of a sudden, he's on a lot of people's cards. Now, for those of you who have brought him into your teams, he's done very well in game week 9 so far. He picked up the assist for the Garnacho goal, originally credited to Enzo Fernandez, ironically, even though he was nowhere near the ball. So with 7 points, I'm sure you're very happy with that, especially with how low the scores currently are. As of time of recording this, it's just before the Wednesday night Carabao Cup fixture, so I'm not too sure how those kind of scores progress. So for him to pick up a 7 points in a week where points are a bit scarce, I'm sure you're ecstatic with that. But when we're looking long term, for me, I'd stay clear of Pedro Neto. He's going to pick you up some points somewhere along the line, of course he is. But with players like Esteval lurking with intent, potentially taking minutes off Pedro Neto, I don't see how he represents good value for money. It's interesting to see how that 17-pointer has brought him onto the table for many. For me, I don't think he's a great transfer. But for those of you who brought him in, I'm sure you're basking in that 7-pointer so far. On to the other side of things, not only are players mass transferred in, they are also mass transferred out. If form is dipped substantially, if the prices are about to drop, I feel like this is where we see the not negative side of Sun Dream Team, but maybe where in a previous year, mainly last year for me, because that was my first year, those price decreases when you felt forced to use transfers because you were going to lose them really affected your ability to keep players that you might have wanted long term. Slightly different this year, of course, but for someone like Tijani Reinders, kicked the season off with an 11-pointer away to Wolves, picked up a couple of 8-pointers away to Arsenal in game week 5, and the Champions League fixture in game week 4 that was. But since then, very disappointing. Pet Roulette hasn't really affected him too much, and even then his points have still been down, where players like Doku and Foden have scored more heavily. A 1-pointer, a 4-pointer, a 3-pointer, a 4, a 3, a 1 and a 1 since the second part of game week 5 does not represent value for money in the slightest. Back-to-back 1-pointers against Villarreal and Aston Villa, where he actually played a deeper role in that one, with Gonzalez and Rodri both not fit to start. He played in a holding midfield role. and that doesn't get the best out of Tijani Reinders at all. To me, you've just got to sell him. There's much better options. If you're looking at just stable midfielders, your 4 to 8 pointers every week, which I think most people thought he would be at Manchester City. There's many more out there, and for me, the 9.5% of players who transferred him out in the top 1K, you've made a great decision. I'd be selling. Ironically, 2 out the top 4 most transferred out players ahead of Game Week 9's deadline still stay in my team. For how much longer? I'm not too sure. The second highest transferred player out ahead of Game Week 9 was Mohamed Kudus of Tottenham Hotspur, transferred out by 9.3% of players in the top 1K. He's been very up and down this season. I've owned him since the start. I brought him in initially to be a potential bonus point monster. From his time at West Ham, there was lots of dribbles, there was lots of fouls given against him. It boosted his bonus point potential up substantially. And that there has been flashes of that in his season so far. An 11-pointer against Burnley on the opening day, a 10-pointer against Brighton in the Premier League, a massive 14-pointer against Leeds in the Premier League. Slightly fortuitous, his goal and his assist in that one they were deflections. But if you look around those big skyscraper points wise, it's been pretty underwhelming, especially for a player who's currently 5.1 million in value. He's risen in price. He's not that 4 to 5 million anymore. We're looking at a lower priced premium asset. 2-pointer against Everton. I need him to do something for my own team against Newcastle in the Carabao Cup. Of course, as an Arsenal fan, I hope he doesn't do too much, but points wise, he needs to bank a few more along the way. A 5-pointer against Monaco, 4-pointer against Villa, 3-pointer against Bodo Glimt, and a 5-pointer against Wolves. They're not the easiest fixtures in the world, but when you look at them on paper, there's none of the big Champions League teams in there from this year. You haven't got your Man Cities, your Liverpools, your Arsenals. And with Tottenham's fixtures slowly starting to turn, more on the negative side of things that we looked at the start, I'm fully expecting his centre-back from his team, Mickey van der Ven, to make the top 4 for Game Week 10, as in transferred players in, especially after his mammoth points performance. But defensively, especially against Monaco, they rode their luck substantially. They should have conceded 2 or 3 in that one. But Kudus is not scoring enough goals for me to warrant his price range. If you need to transfer him out to shift that money elsewhere, maybe get an enabler in and another star target for your squad, I think now might be the time to shift him out. And for me, that 9.3% of the player base in the top 1K, you might have gone a week early, not considering what he's done against Newcastle so far, but you might be ahead of the curve. Christian Romero, the man who started the season on fire for Tottenham at the back, similar to Mickey van der Ven, picking up lots of clean sheet points, not so much on the attacking output side of things, whereas if you watch Tottenham from the outset, you actually think Romero is more liable to pick up a goal from a corner, more attacking, more of a target from those crosses. But this season hasn't been the case. I think Mickey van der Ven scored either 3 or 4 goals so far this season, where he only scored 1 or 2 last campaign. And Romero on the other side of things, he was picking up assists, he was picking up goals in the 24-25 Sun Dream Team campaign. Not so much this year. He started off with a 7-pointer, an 8-pointer, a 4, a 12, and an 8 against Burnley, City, Bournemouth, West Ham, and Villarreal. But since then, since Game Week 5, it has not been Christian Romero's season at all for Tottenham. A combination of being rested for some fixtures and his injury keeping him out. To me, a very easy sell. And the most damning thing on this list is that he was only just transferred out by more players than the player in 4th position, who we'll get to next. And Romero was transferred out by 8.3% of the player base in the top 1K. He's only scored 5 points since the League Cup double in Game Week 5. That's 7 points since the Game Week 5 double, including the Brighton fixture. It's just not enough, and we know that he picked up these niggling injuries. Kevin Danso's come into the Tottenham side. He's looked ready to fill the void of Romero. You're never going to fill exactly what he does, that build up from the back, the great passing play. But from a Sun Dream Team asset where we're looking at points and not necessarily building up from the back, I think Romero's a very much easy sell in your teams. Bank the money, maybe even shift it on to Kevin Danso if Romero's injury isn't looking too long term. I know Dragusin, who suffered an ACL injury last season, is slowly being reintegrated back into the Tottenham squad. He played an under-21 fixture this week, so I still see Kevin Danso being the third choice centre back. And if this Romero injury continues to linger on, it makes him an even better asset. Kevin Danso, that is. Romero, must sell. Fourth most highest transfer player out ahead of the game week 9 deadline was Mohamed Salah, of all players. Transferred out by, I believe, 7.8% of the player base. Just a ridiculous statistic. Sorry, not of the player base, of the top 1K, which just goes to show that the points are getting a bit scarce up there already. People are looking at maybe transferring out one of the most well-renowned point-scoring assets in the game to jump ahead of the curve. He started the season incredibly well. An 11-pointer at home to Bournemouth, a 7-pointer away to Newcastle, just a 2-pointer at home to Arsenal, followed by a 9-pointer away to Burnley, and his biggest point-scoring game of the season so far, the 16-pointer at home to Atletico Madrid in the Champions League. But since then, it's been underwhelming across the board for Mohamed Salah, especially for that 7.5 price that he started the season at. He started the same as Erling Haaland. And if you look at Haaland's scores and Salah's scores, there's only one player coming out on top so far. If you look at from game week 6 to game week 8, so before the game week 9 deadline, he'd picked up 3 points against Palace, a 1-pointer against Galatasaray, where he was on the bench in that one. Chelsea a 3-pointer, Man United with a 4-pointer. Frankfurt also on the bench in that one, so that's back-to-back Champions League games where he's been benched. Just a 3-pointer in the Frankfurt game. Now, personally, I kept him this week and I shifted funds around elsewhere. Now, I'd be intrigued to see if people transferred him out because of his points of being low or to redistribute the money elsewhere. He didn't drop in value nearly as much as I thought he would. It was only either a 0.1 or a 0.2 drop, where I was fully expecting a 0.3 drop. I kept him for the Brentford game and I thought he'd start against Crystal Palace in the Carabao Cup. And maybe he will. Maybe he'll surprise me with a start or a very fruitful cameo off the bench where he's picking up an attacking return or something. But those 9 points against Brentford have already repaid somewhat my faith in him. Whether he can continue that until the international break and beyond is still yet to be seen. But with Crystal Palace this week, Aston Villa and Real Madrid in game week 10 both at home, Manchester City away in game week 11, followed by Forest at home and PSV at home in game week 12. Those kind of fixtures, they're okay across the board. 5 home fixtures out the next 6, including tonight's Carabao Cup one. If he starts them all, I think he gets 2 to 3 attacking returns at least out of that batch of fixtures. If you go back to the Man United game where Gakpo hit the post 3 times, there would have been 2 Salah assists. So you weigh it all up. He's not been the Mohamed Salah from last season. Is he worth the money when we spoke about Cody Gakpo earlier, saving that 2 to 2.5 million price between the two of them? For those of you who did ditch Salah in game week 5 and went to Gakpo, you're massively up on the money. You're massively up on the points. But can Salah pull it back? I think he can over the next few weeks. And I won't be selling him now, I don't think. He's going to stay in price or at least stay stable going into game week 10. And for that reason, it just kind of takes that option off the table for me, especially with a double home fixture for Mohamed Salah. He's going to play against Villa. He's going to play against Real Madrid, almost certainly. I can't see Salah being on the bench for that one. So if you've transferred him out and brought in someone like a Mickey van der Ven this week, you're massively up on the points and you're not going to look back on Salah one bit. But for me, I think he stays around for a little bit longer. So that does indeed conclude today's video. Leave a comment down below on what you thought about this. Did you find the information helpful? Did you pick up a few trends along the way? And was you one of those people who've either transferred out any of the players inside the top 4 or transferred in any of the players inside the top 4 of the options on today's video? Now, as always, my socials are in the description below. We've got TikTok, X and Instagram. I think I'm 30 followers away on X from 500. So if you could, please go over there. Follow me, constantly posting some good stuff and keeping up to date with all the team news that's highly needed, especially on a game like Sun Dream Team where the wheels are always moving in motion. Whilst you're down there, could you please hit the subscribe button as well? We're closing in on 1,300. Thumbs up button 100 is the target on each one, and hit the bell notification so you don't miss an upload in the future. Now, thank you very much for watching today's video. You'll be seeing me in a new one very soon.